folks. How are you doing today? Yeah, what an afternoon it is. What an afternoon it is. I am here, and we are looking at a country basically going into lockdown, right? Starting Monday, actually starting Sunday night, New York City, people are not able to leave their homes unless it is absolutely urgent. Yeah, wow, I'm hearing all kinds of stuff. Various states are on lockdown. The state of California is on lockdown. Folks, this is like something we've never seen before. Folks, this is big. Adam M sent me a super chat telling me hello. Well, hello right back to you, Adam. Let's do that thing where we do kind of a roll call. I see Brian Jakowski from Buffalo, New York. Hello, Brian. Huey Long says this is crazy. Well, there you go. You have to wonder what the real Huey Long would have done in such a circumstance. Fresh Flowers says hello. Names and locations, folks. Let's see who's with us this afternoon on YouTube Live. Liverpool, Tim. Austin, Texas, George Kraft. Toronto, Fresh Flowers. Michael from Germany. Jack Dundee from UK. Lawrence Chu from Albany, New York. Adam M. in Reno. NYC, Upper West Side, Truth Seeker. Arizona, Arthur Porter. Hi, Caleb. I'm in California. Gavin's prediction isn't indefinite, right? Matt Williams, that's kinky. Matt Williams, Oshkosh, Wisconsin. Puerto Rico for 5 days. Auckland, New Zealand. East Germany. New Jersey here, says Dengist Gang. I'm Simon, by the way, says Huey Long. So Huey Long is called Simon. Joe from New Orleans. Glasgow, Scotland. Kaname in Maryland. Athens, Greece. Charlotte, North Carolina. Toronto, Canada, Wendy W. Hello from Heathrow, says Spencer Richards. Minnesota, Katie Simchuk from Cleveland. Kinky, most bizarre in a sparse NYC. It is certainly bizarre. You should see the streets outside. They are just completely empty. Allie from Dublin, Allison McVitie. Rick Fry from Arkansas is with us. Rome, Italy, in the midst of quarantine, says Random for Thinking. Fresh Flowers says Canada. Folks, this is a wild, wild time. Now, I don't know if folks have been paying attention, but at this point, we have the White House doubling down on blaming China for all of this. And not only doing that, not only referring to it as the China virus, the China flu, but on top of that, we have them escalating sanctions on the Islamic Republic of Iran. Iran is already a country with a weakened medical system because of U.S. sanctions. I was there in Iran. There were many people in Iran who couldn't get the medical treatment they needed, whether it was drugs that they needed, medicines that they needed, medical technology they needed, because of the U.S. sanctions, the unilateral sanctions imposed on Iran by the United States. And now, in a situation where Iran is having one of the worst outbreaks of any country, I mean, they are really badly hit by this coronavirus, the USA is not lessening those sanctions and trying to get medicine to the people of Iran. It's doing the opposite. It's tightening the sanctions, making it harder for Iran to get medicine. And this is unbelievable. And not only is it unbelievable, but it's bad. It's very, very bad. Because the coronavirus doesn't have a passport. It doesn't need a visa, right? The coronavirus crosses borders like you wouldn't believe. And if Iran's outbreak is not controlled, pretty soon it's going to spread and it's going to be worse, right? That harming any country's ability at this point to fight against COVID-19 is harming the entire world. And the exact same thing that the United States is doing to Iran at this moment, where they should be doing everything they can to help Iran get this under control, they're doing to Venezuela, right? We're imposing more sanctions on Venezuela, making it more difficult for Venezuela to also fight against COVID-19, escalating sanctions on Venezuela, escalating sanctions on Iran. This is very, very stupid. Very, very, very stupid, right? If Venezuela, which has at this point a small outbreak, but it's in the early stages, right? If Venezuela can't get it under control, do you think that those viruses are going to just stop at the Venezuelan border? No, 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 no. Brazil has already got an out of control outbreak. We want Venezuela to control their coronavirus outbreak. We want Iran to control their coronavirus outbreak. We want every country to control it, because if any country has an out of control epidemic, everyone hurts, right? This is a global pandemic, and the global community needs to fight it in a global way. But this strategy that U.S. leaders seem to be committed to of let's hope this hurts our geopolitical rivals is suicidal for the human race. It is absolutely suicidal for the human race. We cannot be committed to this. I am blown away by how ridiculously stupid this is being handled, right? This will hurt the entire human race if it's not gotten rid of. And the attacks on China fit into the exact same category. China has beat this already, right? China had it 2 months ahead of everyone else. They had 2 months of research, 2 months of figuring out how it spreads, how it doesn't spread, 2 months of figuring things out, right? And instead of cooperating with them, instead of getting our scientists on the phone with Chinese scientists around the clock to figure out what to do about this, we've got a situation. I see your super chat, Lisa Hauserman, and we will get to that. I will absolutely get to that. Let me grab a pen. And I'll write down the super chats as they come in. I don't want anyone's super chat to not be answered. Okay, super chat. All right, so we're in a situation where we have people that are so committed to regime change efforts, to overthrowing governments around the world, to destabilization, so committed to geopolitical rivalry and trying to dismantle Russia and China, trying to weaken Russia and China, that they are so committed to that, that they would impede humanity's ability to defeat coronavirus. This is absolutely shocking. Now, folks, I want you to compare U.S. foreign policy related to COVID-19 to Chinese foreign policy and Cuban foreign policy, right? China has dealt with COVID-19. They've got it pretty well under control now compared to what it once was. So what are they doing? Well, they have been airdropping supplies into Italy right now, masks, other supplies, and they're talking about setting up a health Silk Road. That's what they're talking about right now, a health Silk Road that would be a transmission belt around the world for medical supplies so that other countries can get this under control, right? They are sending doctors to Iran and Iraq to help contain this. Right? China is also in the process of helping Spain. Now, China, compared to the level of development of European Union countries, it's not up there yet. But yet, they're stepping up to the plate. They say, we already beat this in China, we have experience, we're going to help other people. But let me add, before this was even a global pandemic, when this was just in Wuhan, right? In the early stages of this, Cuba dispatched doctors to Wuhan. Bet you didn't know that. There were Cuban doctors flown in to Wuhan, to China, immediately when this crisis was breaking out. And there are Cuban doctors all across South and Central America right now getting countries ready. There are countries that haven't been affected by this. And they're already getting countries ready. Cuban doctors are everywhere. The Cuban medical system that Ban Ki-moon called the greatest in the world is swinging into action on a global level to try and address this. So China and Cuba are desperately trying to help people in light of this pandemic. Meanwhile, the United States is desperately trying to use this pandemic to hurt people, right? To escalate racial hatred for people from China, call it the China virus, call it the China flu, escalate anti-Asian bigotry, escalate their sanctions, kill people with their sanctions, increase their sanctions on Iran, make it harder for Iran to get its public health under control, make it harder for Venezuela. The U.S. leaders are using a global pandemic to hurt people. Meanwhile, China and Cuba are actively talking about how they can help people. Do you see that difference, folks? Do you see that difference? There's a global pandemic. A disease is killing people. And the people who rule the United States say, great, let's use this to hurt people. Let's figure out how we can get some people we don't like. I don't like them Venezuelans, them socialists and communists down there in Venezuela. Let's use this to get them. They say Iran, right? Iran, we don't like the Ayatollahs. We don't like the Islamic Republic. Let's use this to get them. Let's use it to get them. We don't like the Chinese. Yeah, it first originated in China or something. Let's use this to demonize Chinese people around the world. Let's hope we can escalate some hate crimes and bigotry against them. Yeah, that's how they're viewing it. Meanwhile, Cuba, Venezuela, China, they're saying, wow, there's a global pandemic. We better stop this before it gets more out of control. Let's send our scientists, let's send our doctors all over the world to try and stop this. Folks, we need, at this point, to have an international summit. I interviewed Daniel yesterday, the Senate candidate from New Jersey, and one thing he said is he says it's urgent. There needs to be an international summit. We need Vladimir Putin, we need Xi Jinping, we need Trump, we need Modi of India, we need them all on the phone right now to figure this out, right? I mean, Russia, China, India, the United States, the EU, they should all be on the phone coordinating a global relief effort, right? There should be an international summit right now to deal with this so that every country can share its information. This isn't a competition. And that's one thing that Bernie Sanders pointed out about the problem we've got here. We don't have a healthcare system in the United States. We have a bunch of private insurance companies. We have a bunch of private hospitals, all kind of doing their own thing. We don't have an actual healthcare system. And when you face a pandemic, you need an actual healthcare system where efforts can be coordinated. There shouldn't be any competition involved in this situation. There should not be any competition involved. This should be seen as a moment where the global community should come together and make sure that we nip this in the bud as fast as we possibly can. And let's be real. People have pointed out that this virus, things like this are going to become more prevalent. The danger of things like this happening is increasing because the global population is becoming more concentrated than it ever has been, right? The human race is assembling in urban areas. Rural life, farm country life is dying, right? Agribusiness, peasantry. We don't have peasants around the world anymore. Agribusiness, the mechanization of agriculture. The human population is increasingly concentrating in urban centers, right? In the United States, we know that, right? People are running to the coast. I grew up in a rural community in Ohio, a little town where Smucker's jelly was made, very small industrial town in Ohio. That's where I grew up. But many of the people I went to school with either live in New York City or Boston or on the Eastern Seaboard like I do. I live here in New York City. Or they moved to California, right? Southern California. But people are having a much harder time living in smaller towns, living in rural areas. And this is not just, in the United States. This is a global problem, right? The human population is concentrating in urban centers. And as a result of that, human beings are living at much closer confines than ever before. So things like coronavirus, like COVID-19, are going to spread much more rapidly. Never has the human population been as concentrated as it is now, right? This is the human population is being urbanized. It's quite interesting. You read the Communist Manifesto. He lists 10 planks of what he envisions the dictatorship of the proletariat to be like, Karl Marx, and he's writing in 1848. One of the things he writes about is that it would abolish the divide between urban and rural areas, right? It would kind of even out the population. That's Marx. I mean, he's thinking long term, but he realizes that having intense concentrations of human beings living in some places and having very, very widespread, spread out living of human beings in other places is very inefficient. So back in 1848, one of the goals that Karl Marx lays out in his vision of what the proletariat might do after it takes power is he says, abolish the divide between town and countryside. That's actually one of the things he writes about. Now, perhaps Marx was thinking about the danger of pandemics, right? Which countries will dodge the big crash, in your opinion, says Dante. That's a super chat, and I will address that. Which countries will dodge the big crash? Let me get my pen that I just dropped. 1 second. All right. Dodge. Ugh. I'm trying to juggle everything in one hand. I've got you on my stabilizer, which keeps you from bouncing around, which keeps me from having to hold my hand still. Dodge, crash. Dante. All right. We're going to address all those super chats at once. But we're facing the reality that the human population is concentrated in urban areas, and so things like this are going to spread more rapidly. I wanted to talk about that as well. Now, it's not just the foreign policy response to this pandemic that has been stupid on the part of our leaders. One thing that has been going on, which I cannot fathom, I just cannot fathom this, is this week in New York City, where I live, there have been ICE raids. Immigration Customs Enforcement has been raiding neighborhoods and communities in the Bronx. Now, folks, at a time like this, right? Even worse pandemic will come when a superbug destroys antibiotics. Okay, superbug. Folks, at a time like this, you want anybody who has symptoms to come forward, right? We found out that at this point, the amount of people that have it in New York City is like almost 5,000 people, right? Almost 5,000 people have it in New York City. And at a moment like this, when we're trying to keep a disease from spreading, what you desperately want to do is you want very much to have anyone who has a symptom to come forward. You want them to come forward, step up and say, I've got a symptom, test me. If immigrant communities are afraid that they're going to be deported, or if someone is afraid that someone in their household is going to be deported, they're not going to step up. And you can say, oh, no, that's not how it works. Yeah, immigrant communities are terrified, right? They're terrified of a raid on their workplace. They're terrified of getting stopped by ICE, And so when you increase the ICE raids in these neighborhoods, in immigrant neighborhoods, the Bronx, I mean, the amount of people there that are immigrant, that are undocumented, massive. If you increase the amount of raids that are going on, people that have symptoms are not going to come forward. They're going to be terrified. It's the stupidest thing you could possibly do. I got on the InfoWars website to see what Alex Jones was saying. And now, today, finally, they are scaling back ICE activity. Finally. And they're angry about it. They're angry that they're scaling back ICE activity. Well, they better be scaling back ICE activity. This is not the time to be engaging in ICE raids, right? They're finally pausing the ICE raids today. But earlier this week, Monday, Tuesday, there were ICE raids going on in the Bronx. Now, who says, oh, wow, New York City is virtually shut down. We're on the brink of shutting down the entire city because there's, thousands of people have coronavirus. I know, let's have an ICE raid. Let's make every immigrant community terrified to come forward. The stupidest thing you can do. I mean, these folks, a lot of these anti-immigrant folks, they don't even think. I'm not even going to argue with people about immigration, right? Just put all of that aside. Put all of your arguments about immigration aside, right? Let's stop arguing about, no human being is illegal and all of that. Just put all of that on the side. Think from a policy standpoint, okay? Right? One of the biggest concerns that these anti-immigrant folks have is, MS-13 and criminal organizations that are brutal, murderous groups, right? And we know about these criminal groups, right? The criminal gangs operating on the border, the people smuggling people across the border, the people smuggling drugs across the border. Nasty, nasty bunch of people, right? No question about it. So you want to stop those people, right? You want the police to go after those folks and get them, get those criminals. The last thing you want to do is make people in immigrant communities terrified that they're going to be deported, right? Think about it, right? Sanctuary cities. That's a thing that these anti-immigrant folks hate. They hate sanctuary cities. Well, think about it, folks. If you have a sanctuary city, that means the police don't cooperate with ICE. That means if you get arrested, you don't get deported. Wouldn't you want to have a sanctuary city if you're going to go after MS-13? Of course you would, because if immigrant communities are terrified of calling the police, if immigrant communities are terrified of calling the police because they might get deported, right? There's MS-13 in their neighborhood killing people, doing that, and they're scared that if they call the police will show up and they'll get deported. You're screwed, right? That the best friend that MS-13 has is ICE. Right? If the immigrant communities are terrified of being deported, they're living in the shadows, they're afraid, they're terrified, they're not going to cooperate with the police against MS-13. They're not going to cooperate with health officials against the coronavirus. They're going to hide. They're going to never talk to anybody. They're going to be, and the problems are going to persist. From a public health, public security perspective, keeping immigrant communities terrified is not strategic. Put all the other arguments aside. ICE raids right now, they should have stopped immediately. The second we found out we had this, we should have stopped it. And we should have had ads in multiple languages on television telling people, if you have the symptoms, you can go, get tested. Tests should have been immediately available. And then on top of that, the ads should have made clear, no one will be deported. No immigration officials will have access to people who are getting tested and getting medical care for coronavirus. That should have been immediate. But again, certain people are just too hateful to implement a policy like that. And that seems to be the issue here. Folks, we all know somebody. Maybe there's someone in our family, maybe someone in our workplace, maybe someone we went to school with. We all know somebody. And they're a kind of person that just walks around, locked and loaded. They've got resentment. They got bitterness. They got anger, right? Maybe you're like that. I mean, I certainly have a lot of anger. A lot of people do. You all know that. But, somebody who walks around, and not only is this person walking around, locked and loaded, chip on their shoulder, angry, but on top of that, they're always looking for somebody to blame, right? They really want to blame somebody, and they just got this resentment, and they really want to blame somebody. And they're not really interested in solving problems in their own life or in anyone else's life, right? Maybe they don't like their job. Maybe they don't like their family members. Maybe they don't like their living conditions. Maybe they don't like their marriage. Maybe they don't like their family that they live with. They don't like living with their family. For whatever reason, they're walking around bitter and resentful. And any opportunity they get to hate somebody else, they take it. But they never try to fix up their own life. Never. They never are able, or maybe they're not able to. They don't have the willpower to start actually trying to fix up their life. They don't even want to fix up their own life. It doesn't even occur to them that they could fix up their own life. The things that they're actually mad about, whether it be their living situation, their job, their family, whatever. It doesn't even occur to them that they could actually fix those problems. So all that occurs to them is that they want a constant outlet for that pent-up rage. And that's kind of the situation we're in right now. These people that are blaming China all over social media, calling it, the Wuhan flu or the whatever, China virus, whatever. These people do not really want to solve the problem. If they wanted to solve the problem, they would advocate working with China. But they don't want to solve the problem. They want to blame somebody. They don't think we can solve the problem. They're not concerned about solving the problem. But they just see this as an opportunity to hate another country, people of another ethnicity. It's an opportunity for them to unload some of that pessimistic resentment that they carry around with them all day long, that probably doesn't have anything to do with this coronavirus situation and is probably related to things in their own life which they themselves are afraid to change. They're not going to stand up to those relatives they don't like. They're not going to change. They're not going to change their life. They're not going to try to get out of a job situation they don't like. But they just want somebody to unload that anger on. And so, Trump gave me permission to hate Chinese people. Perfect, right? Oh, Trump gave me permission to hate immigrants and go after immigrants in a time like this. Perfect, right? Oh, they're not part of the effort. We need joint effort right now to solve the crisis. These people, they don't want to solve the crisis. They just want to unload some of their resentment. I don't know if you've ever gotten into an argument with someone who's like this before, in your workplace, school, whatnot, right? And you have a real problem. You have a problem that needs to be fixed in your household, in your school, and whatever. And you're saying, we need to fix the problem. And they're going, it's your fault, you piece of shit, you garbage. Oh, it's your fault. I'm so mad at you. And you're like, okay, we can argue all day about whose fault it is, but that's not going to solve the problem. We actually need to solve the problem. They're like, yeah, it's all you. It's your fault, and the problem won't be solved, and it's all your fault, and it's your fault, or it's Joe's fault, or it's somebody else's fault. And it's like, okay, I understand you believe it's this person's fault, you believe it's my fault, you believe it's Joe's fault or Steve's fault, but I'm asking you, can you please help us solve the problem? Oh, it's Joe's fault, it's Steve's fault, it's Bob's fault. It's like, I get it. You blame this other person for the problem. I get it. I totally get it. You blame the other person for the problem. I get that, right? You've told me that over and over again. We're trying to now solve the problem. What are you going to do to help us out? Well, we can't solve the problem because Joe ruined it up, and Steve, and he's the problem. It's Joe, it's Steve, it's Rebecca, it's Tom, it's Bob, it's you, and you're like, I got it. But I want to actually solve the problem, okay? Okay, you want to point fingers, you want to unload your resentment, you want to say nasty things, you want to scream and yell. I'm trying to actually solve the problem here. Can you help us solve the problem? That's what we're dealing with. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation like that in your workplace, in school, or whatever. That's the situation we're in right now. There is a group of people that are walking around, and they don't want to solve the problem with coronavirus. They don't want the situation to get better. They want to blame China. They want to blame immigrants. They want to escalate with Venezuela. They want to escalate with Iran. They don't actually want to solve the problem. There is a problem on our hands that needs to be solved. They don't want to blame. They don't want to solve the problem. They just want to hurt other people. They want to yell. They want to punish people. They want to scream. I feel sorry for these people. I really feel sorry for these people. That is a hyper state of negativity. That is a state of extreme negativity, right? That level of bitterness. Where you have no will to solve the problems. You have no will to get things done, to actually make things better. You just have this bitter resentment. That level of bitterness must mean that person is really in a lot of emotional pain. That person is really in a state. That person doesn't like getting up in the morning. That person doesn't like looking in the mirror and seeing their own face. That person really hates themselves on some level if they're carrying around that much resentment. I pity that kind of person. And I urge you, if you have a tendency to be that kind of person, to stop it, right? I mean, of course, that's not me telling you that is not going to solve it, but I urge you to wrangle with yourself, to not be that kind of person who blames other people for problems, doesn't actively solve them, doesn't have any will to actually get things done, and just kind of wallows in bitterness and resentment, right? I urge you, I really urge you to wrangle with yourself and try not to be that kind of person. Try to be the kind of person who loves your community. Try to be the kind of person who wants to make the world a better place. Try to be the kind of person who wants to make the world better and improve living conditions and fight for justice and make a better country for the United States, make a better world. Don't try to be that kind of bitter, resentful, punisher, sadistic, pessimist, right? You don't want to be that kind of person. And I really hope that you can all not be that kind of person. I will say, if we want to blame somebody, right? And I don't want to get into too much of this negativity, because what we need right now, more than anything, is some serious optimism and some serious energy if we're going to solve this crisis. But Richard Burr, Dianne Feinstein, folks, I mean, I'm not going to get into the specifics on this live, but look at the details. I mean, these folks knew this was coming, and they sold off their stocks, and yeah, I mean, look at the details, right? I mean, people are calling for their resignations, right? A lot of folks on Capitol Hill were selling off their stocks and urging their donors to sell off their stocks, and yeah, there was some behavior by our elected officials that wasn't in the interests of the whole country. They were taking care of number one and using this crisis to take care of number one. Look at the details. There'll be videos on it later and such. But I'm telling you, folks, some of our elected officials have not been, upstanding and proper in the way they've handled this crisis. Surprise, surprise, right? If you can trust anyone, you can trust a politician. But I want to answer the two super chats that we got, right? And we'll answer the two super chats and then, or the three super chats that we've got. And I'm going to address those three super chats. And then I've got some other things I want to talk to you all about. So super chat number one was from Lisa Hauserman. I hope she's still with us. Lisa Hauserman. She asked about the definition of socialism and how socialism is not the redistribution of wealth. And that's very important to remember. I hate the phrase redistribution of wealth. I absolutely hate that phrase, because redistribution of wealth happens in every society all the time. All the time. All the time. Right? The roads of New York City, those are roads that were paid for with money that was redistributed from the taxpayer, and we got roads, right? Right? Food stamps. Thank you, Lawrence Chu, for the super chat. Food stamps, right? It's very important for American agribusiness to sell products. American farmers, American agribusiness, they need to sell products. Low-income people need food. So, in the 1930s, Henry Wallace, the vice president, former Secretary of Agriculture, developed a program where low-income people could buy food from farmers, right? Redistribution of wealth. Right? We redistribute to big corporations all the time. Oil subsidies, for example. Farm subsidies to American agribusiness, right? Subsidies, government subsidies. That's when the government writes somebody a check, right? That happens all the time to rich people, poor people. Redistribution of wealth happens in every society to some degree or other. Now, libertarians say, yeah, but I don't want it to go on. Well, some societies do it very little. Some societies do it a lot. Some have more social programs and redistribute it to the population overall or to low-income folks. Some redistribute to private corporations. But to some degree or other, the redistribution of wealth happens in every society and always has and always will. Okay? And so when people say socialism is the redistribution of wealth, they're obscuring the entire question. That is not what socialism is. If that was the case, every society would be socialist, and every society is not socialist. Socialism is about control of the means of production. The major centers of economic power, the banks, the factories, the means of transportation, the means of communication, right? The oil wells, the coal mines, the natural resources, the power plants, right? The tech companies, the tech hubs, the tech giants, right? Major centers of economic power. And socialism is when those things are forced by the state to work according to a central plan in the interests of all of society. Right now, those things operate in the interest of profit. Facebook operates on the basis of trying to make a profit for its shareholders, among them Mark Zuckerberg. Google operates on the basis of trying to make a profit for its shareholders, among them Eric Schmidt, the founder, right? ExxonMobil operates for the purpose of making a profit for its shareholders, right? It's a descendant of Standard Oil, the Rockefeller family. General Electric, huge corporation that produces all kinds of electrical equipment and computers and all kinds of stuff, operates on the basis of making a profit for the Morgans and many other families that are heavily invested in it, right? The owner class, those who own the major centers of economic power, the capitalists, operate what they own, which is all the major centers of economic power, all the major means of production. They operate it on the basis of trying to make a profit for themselves. Socialism is the negation of that. Socialism is when the economy is organized to serve the people. When big corporations, when major oil wells, when major factories, when banking institutions, when these things don't operate on the basis of profit, but according to what the state tells them to do, when there is a state central plan, when these things are forced to work in the interest of all society, when the major industries are owned by the people and production is planned according to what society needs, when the banks lend money on the basis of what society needs, not what's going to make them a profit, when the economy is rationally planned, and not simply left up to operating based on whatever is profitable, right? When profits are not in command, but when human reason dictates economic activity and controls the means of production, that is socialism. Socialism is a planned economy. Socialism is a rationally planned economy, not planned in the interest of profit, but controlled by the state to work in the interests of the people. That's what socialism is. And in socialism, often there's a very high rate of government ownership, but government ownership isn't 100% in socialism either. You might have a lot of private corporations. But does the state have the ability to step in and force those private corporations to do what is in the interest of society? That's the question, right? I'll think of a very good example, but often the way I've put it is that in capitalism, the government is controlled by the corporations, right? In capitalism, corporations control the government. Big bankers, private interests, they tell the government what to do. The government simply exists to facilitate the making of profits by the rich, right? The government protects the private property of the rich. Libertarians will tell you this. The government's only job is to protect property, right? That's essentially what the government does, is it protects the property. It protects the profits of the rich. Socialism is the opposite. Socialism is when the government controls the economy. In capitalism, corporations control the government. In socialism, the government controls the corporations, and it controls the economy overall to work in the interests of the people. When the economy is forced by central planners, by a powerful state that is rooted in communities, when there is a well-organized population controlling the economy, forcing the economy to work in the interests of public good, that is what socialism is. That is what socialism is. Socialism is a rationally planned economy, not profits in command. That's what socialism is. Socialism has been very successful. Socialism took the Soviet Union from being one of the poorest countries in the world to being a global superpower. Socialism made China, at this point, the second largest economy in the world. Socialism is the reason that Cuba, a very small island, is known all over the world for its medical achievements. Socialism has had many great successes. It's conducted an economic miracle in Vietnam. I wrote about that. Socialism defeated Hitler during the Second World War. Socialism invented space travel. Socialism, is responsible for all kinds of great human achievements. The notion that socialism has never achieved anything, it's all been the market, is malarkey, right? In the 1970s, the Soviet Union had computers that were almost as advanced, if not as advanced, as the computers in Western countries. Socialism has had many successes, right? Socialism, by applying human reason to controlling economic activity, not allowing economic activity to be allowed up to the chaos of the market, socialism has had many, many big achievements, right? Now, as far as the question from Dante about dodging the crash, No one's going to dodge the crash, folks. The crash is upon us. No one's going to dodge it, right? China is already suffering, right? The USA is already suffering. No one's going to dodge the crash. The question is, will countries be able to control the economy, right? Will countries be able to stabilize? Will there be enough state control that the crash doesn't have catastrophic consequences? Look, the crash is already here. The crash is already here, and everyone's going to suffer, right? Spending is going to go down. Incomes are going to decrease, but how much will people be protected, and how much will governments be able to step in and stabilize things, right? I pointed out, the U.S. economy is centered around the stock market. In China, they have a stock market, but the economy is centered around the government. The stock market is secondary, right? And that's why the 2008 financial crash, actually, China, came out of it pretty much unscathed. They had a big expansion economically because they were able to have the government step in and stabilize things. In 2015, when the Chinese stock market tanked, the government just walked in there, boom, and it was like it didn't happen the next week. When the state is in control, you don't have the free fall that normally happens under capitalism. So that needs to be said, and I hope that answers the question. As far as superbugs, well, superbugs are not viruses. They're not viruses, right? And superbugs are germs that are resistant to antibiotics. Antibiotics. That's what that is. I did a story about one in the Washington, D.C. area. I interviewed a mother who had her child die from a superbug. They're bacteria, and they are resistant to antibiotics. And every so often we see them. They pop up every so often. And eventually, we know, I mean, we're talking maybe hundreds of years, maybe sooner than that, there will be a lot more of them. Every so often they pop up. There was one in the D.C. area. I interviewed a woman in a hospital about it. It's a very serious thing. They are extremely dangerous because they take us back to the days before antibiotics, essentially, right? And that one of the main focuses of a lot of biomedical research is to develop new strands of antibiotics that can defeat these superbugs. And it's a concern, and it's a looming threat, right? Just like, we knew something like coronavirus might happen. We didn't know when. Well, the superbug stuff might happen. It's different. It's not a virus, though. So it's a different situation, but it's something to keep your eye on. It's important. And again, if we had a rational, planned economy, we would be on top of this like you wouldn't believe. The scientific community would be studying what do we do to make sure we don't deal with that. We would have people on top of that. And if our medical system wasn't about making profits in the short term for corporations, if it was, foreseeing long-term threats, we'd be giving more attention to it. I think more attention needs to be given to the superbug threat, honestly. I think a lot of people don't know enough about it. So I hope that answers the super chats. But yeah, if you haven't given your name and location yet, why don't you do that? Why don't we shout out to names and locations for those who haven't shouted out to yet? Who else is with us? Who just joined with us? I see we're up to like 154 people. Folks, if you haven't hit the like button, please hit the like button. Please give me some likes. And on top of that, if you're subscribed, make sure you're still subscribed, because YouTube has this policy, JT24 in Mississippi, Edinburgh, Scotland, Christopher Samanchik in Cleveland, Tina from Wisconsin, Canada, Chronica in South Carolina, Washington, Utah, Ron Waggoner, Liverpool, New Jersey, quarantine, Rachel Martinez in Independence, Missouri, Helen, right, the moon, Ezra from Atlanta, but in Nebraska, St. Louis, Missouri, Canada, 11, right, Parker from California, San Diego, Tommy Farras, Edinburgh, Scotland, Heidi Edelweiss, Ontario, Canada, Nathaniel P. Adams, Liberty City, Puerto Rico, Portugal, Rafael Milo, right, New Zealand, Colorado, still strong in Arizona, says Arthur Porter, Washington, D.C., Roxalana Thor. Wow, I'm glad you all are here, folks. I'm glad you all are here. Space Communist is joining us from a city ironically named Corona, in light of the coronavirus, right? Itatus is in East Germany, right? Lincolnite Yankee. But folks, make sure that you have hit the subscribe button. And if you're subscribed, David Fox is from Australia, right? Noel Auckland, that's in New Zealand. if you haven't subscribed, make sure you subscribe, because Facebook has this, or YouTube has this weird policy of like unsubscribing people randomly. It's very strange, but it's part of their. It's not like personal. It's like part of their algorithm. So make sure you're subscribed, and then hit that bell. You see that bell, that notifications button, that bell. Click on the bell. Make sure that you're getting notifications of these lives, because you want to know about them. Because I might be doing them not, usually when life was normal, what I would do is I would just, I would announce it 2, 3 days, a week in advance and let it build. Well, now I'm going to be doing them much more regularly. I'm going to be doing these lives more often, but I'm not going to be doing them with as much notice. So you want to hit that bell so you don't miss anything. You want to be part of the show. You want to see it live. It's always better live. So shout out to Ramiro out in LA. He's with us. Welcome, Ramiro. Yeah, I mean, folks, you want to hit that bell. You want to make sure you're subscribed. You want to make sure that you're getting notifications. You want to hit the like button. The more likes, the more fun we have here. Akeem asks me when I'm going to visit Russia. I've been to Russia a few times, and I hope to go again soon. I had an invitation, but then in light of everything that's going on, obviously it's on hold. But, I'd like to get to Russia very soon. Every time I go to Russia, I enjoy it, right? The hotels you've got there are amazing. The sights, the architecture of Moscow is beautiful. I've been to Crimea. Not many people have been to Crimea. And by the way, finally, we've got the Washington Post admitting what I saw with my own eyes, which is that most people in Crimea want to be part of Russia, support Russia. It wasn't an invasion. It wasn't a, annexation. Most Crimeans are very happy, think of themselves as Russian. I'm glad the Washington Post finally admitted that. I've been to Yalta, which is a city in Crimea by the ocean, right? That's where the Yalta meetings during World War II were. Beautiful, beautiful. Crimea is just beautiful. I'm really glad I had the opportunity to visit Crimea. Crimea is just a really, really great place. And furthermore, where else? I've been to Sochi. I was in Sochi, Russia, for the World Festival of Youth and Students in 2017. That was an experience. Now, Dakota Lilly was there with me. Don Quarter, my good friend, he was also there. That was an experience. That was such an experience in Sochi for the World Festival of Youth and Students, this huge gathering of young people who are opposed to imperialism and favor democracy. Wow, that was really amazing. So, I've had some great experiences in Russia. I hope to get back there soon, I hope to get back to Iran at some point as well. It's very difficult to travel to Iran now that, Trump has ripped up everything. But I hope to get back to Iran. I hope to get back to Venezuela soon. I hope to get back to the different, anti-imperialist countries of the world, right? I would really like to visit countries where the bosses and bankers don't have the power, but the people do, where there's an economy organized to serve public good. It's refreshing to visit countries like that. People are a lot more chill in those countries. They're not nervous. They're not scared like they are in other places. People have a little more security. But yeah, folks, I did want to read you something. I do that on these lives as I read. And part of the reason that I wanted to read you this, let me put this in context, is that, now that we're facing an economic crisis, which I've been warning folks about, right? I've been warning folks that there's going to be an economic fallout because of overproduction, because the capitalists have advanced technology, because of, all these problems, that I've written about the huge amount of debt in the U.S. economy, about the crumbling infrastructure of the United States, the falling incomes of the workers, the lack of places for workers at the assembly line. We knew there was going to be a crash. Now, the coronavirus has preempted it, brought it here, ahead of time, right? But it was already going to happen. The household debt rate in the United States is through the roof. Young people are not anywhere having the standard of living their parents had. The physical economy in terms of things being produced is declining. We have an economy in the United States based on speculation, Wall Street bets, and all kinds of things where things are not actually being produced. The economy is money creating more money, which doesn't lead to actual production, which ultimately leads to a crash. We know that. Right? The irrationality of capitalism as it eliminates the worker, as it financializes things. I've done whole videos explaining, why the economic crisis is coming. I did a video why the economic crisis is inevitable. I tweeted it out, and over a year ago, over 2 years ago, I've been talking about this. In my book, City Builders and Vandals in Our Age, I talked about, why capitalism is naturally unstable. I quoted from Albert Einstein, of all people. Albert Einstein wrote a very good essay called Why Socialism? And in it, he talks about Marx's concept of overproduction and the inherent irrationality of the capitalist system. So, I've been warning you all about this, and if you're one of the regular viewers of this, you knew something like the economic fallout we're now facing was going to happen. You just didn't know when. You didn't know it was going to be spawned by a disease, but here we are. And that at this point, with the global economy shut down, with such a huge slowdown in consumption and spending, as a result, the economy is just, is grinding to a halt. I mean, 1 in 5 Americans has already lost a job or lost significant income because of this crisis. And when this is all said and done, the amount of companies that are going to go out of business, this is looking to be a very serious situation. And the most frustrating thing about this is that because of the virus, we all have to stay inside. We can't go outside. We can't organize around it. We can't have public meetings and plan our response. It must be very, very frustrating to be in this kind of situation. But when the dust clears, when society gets back to normal, those of us who believe in socialism, those of us who want to save our country from the irrationality of capitalism, are going to have a lot of work to do because we're going to be in the middle of an economic crisis. We're going to be in the middle of an economic crisis pretty soon, right? And when society gets back to normal, we're going to have big, big problems. In Congress, they continue debating what the next, are we all going to get a check for $1,000? Are we all going to get a check for $2,000? But that's not going to cut it. People are suffering out there, and we are going to have to, set up some kind of mechanism where people start to care for each other, where people who are left behind can get some kind of help, and we can, from there, build community and start organizing resistance. It's going to have to happen. And I don't know what it's going to look like. I mean, this is 2020. There has never been a 2020 before. Last year was 2019. The year before that was 2018. We've never been in this situation before, and we don't want to copy anything from the past. But it's important to know about what happened in the past, right? When people have tried, when people have been downtrodden and suffering economically, how people have organized resistance of the people in order to get economic relief, in order to move towards socialism. And I have written this book. I mean, it's the text of a class I gave a couple years ago called The Rise and Fall of the U.S. Communist Party. And it's like a booklet. It's a little booklet I gave on the history of the Communist Party of the United States. And for those who know anything about the history of the Communist Party of the United States, you'll know that the moment where they really stepped up to the plate, the moment where they really gained a huge amount of influence in the United States and kind of, took history into their own hands was the Great Depression, right? The 1930s, the early 1930s. And the Communist Party organized amid the Great Depression. And they took advantage of the moment. And they started helping those who were downtrodden, and they did great things. So I'm actually going to read to you a chapter from this book, The Rise and Fall of the U.S. Communist Party. I'm going to read to you the chapter on how the Communist Party organized during the Great Depression. And actually, there's a lot of really good graphics in this book. So I'm actually going to read to you. For some reason, my nose is itching like crazy. I'm going to read to you some of the chapter. I'm going to read you the whole chapter on the Great Depression, how the Communist Party organized. And yes, the book is available on Amazon, but I have many copies. When this conference that I'm organizing ever happens, you can get one there. It's widely available. There's also an audio recording of the entire class that I gave. But I'm going to be reading to you from The Rise and Fall of the U.S. Communist Party. I'm going to read to you the chapter called The Fighting Years. And as you can see, the graphic. I'm going to show you the graphics because there's some great graphics in this book. This is a picture of communist protesters from the 1930s. They have a sign that says, "We are citizens, not transients." I'm going to read you. It's The Fighting Years. This is how the Communist Party responded to the Great Depression. When the U.S. stock market crashed in 1929, a crisis of mass unemployment swept the United States. Real starvation and homelessness swept the country. Small farmers were foreclosed by banks. The wages of industrial workers drastically fell, as millions of unemployed workers were available to replace them. In response to the Great Depression, and armed with a new tactical orientation called the United Front from Below, the Communist Party swung into action. The Communists organized unemployment councils in almost every major city in the United States. The unemployment councils staged almost daily hunger marches, storming into the offices of elected officials, chanting, "Work or wages now." The unemployment councils battled the police and sheriffs to stop evictions. On March 6th, 1930, the Communist International declared International Unemployment Day, and mass rallies demanding jobs took place in almost every major city throughout the United States and Europe. The unemployed movement that swept the United States from 1929 to 1934 was completely controlled by the Communist Party. Their slogan was, "Don't starve, fight." And here's actually a poster of some of the unemployment protests happening, where this young boy is holding a sign that says, "Why can't you give my dad a job?" Right? That was the kind of rallies the Communist Party organized in the 1930s. In Alabama, the unemployed staged a massive demonstration led by Angelo Herndon, a 19-year-old African-American youth who had joined the Communist Party after he saw a poster that proclaimed the death penalty for lynchers. As 4,000 unemployed workers stormed the Alabama state capitol, the government officials immediately panicked and announced thousands of dollars in relief money. Angelo Herndon was then charged and sentenced to death under a law passed during the time of slavery that forbid insurrection from black people. Herndon became an international celebrity. After a huge international campaign, the U.S. Supreme Court stopped his execution and freed him in 1937. Angelo Herndon. 110,000 people assembled in Union Square in New York City on March 6, 1931, for International Unemployment Day. The police had denied a parade permit, but led by communists, the crowd proceeded to battle the police, eventually marching from Union Square to City Hall. Police on horseback were knocked over as the Young Communist League released a barrage of marbles. During the following year, the Communist Party formed the famous Bonus Army. 43,000 unemployed veterans traveled to Washington, D.C., and occupied the National Mall from June 17th to July 28th of 1932. The veterans demanded that they be paid benefits and were led by James W. Ford, an African-American World War I veteran who later ran for president on the Communist Party ticket. The great-grandson of Abraham Lincoln joined the bonus marchers. On July 28th, Washington, D.C. police tried to evict the marchers and opened fire, killing 2 veterans, William Hushka and Eric Carlson. After 2 people were killed, the Bonus Army still refused to leave, so President Hoover sent the U.S. Army, who violently cleared the veterans' encampment with tear gas and bayonets. In Detroit, a crowd of protesters from the local Unemployment Council and the Young Communist League assembled at Henry Ford's mansion, demanding that he use some of his money to provide food for the thousands of auto workers who had recently been laid off. Henry Ford's private security guards opened fire on the protesters with machine guns, killing 4 of them. Everyone knew that the unemployment councils, the bonus army, and the rest of the huge movement demanding economic relief was controlled by the Communist Party. The Communist Party refused to allow the Socialist Party or other leftist groups to join their organizations. The line of the Communist International was that Social Democrats preached socialism but practiced fascism and helped capitalism by pointing workers away from revolution. Fistfights between the Communist Party and rival leftist groups were very common. Trotskyites and anarchists often attempted to disrupt public meetings of the Communist Party and were removed. Communist Party members were also known to disrupt and protest meetings of Trotskyites and the Socialist Party, who they referred to as social fascists. Now, I have a picture here from the strike of 1934. That's kind of the battle in the streets. And as part of the United Front from Below tactical orientation, the Communist Party stopped working within the existing unions that were led by Social Democrats. Instead, they formed their own labor federation called the Trade Union Unity League and attempted to form communist-controlled unions. In Gastonia, North Carolina, the communists organized textile workers. The communists demanded equal treatment for black and white workers in the textile mills and organized a multiracial union. The National Textile Workers Union included both recognition of the Soviet Union and the creation of socialism in its official program. In Gastonia, the houses the workers lived in were owned by the textile company. When workers went on strike for better pay, they were evicted from their homes. For months, the striking textile workers lived in tents, refusing to go back to work and fighting off the sheriffs. Eventually, the local sheriff was killed in a shootout with the strikers. Communist organizer Fred Beale fled the Soviet Union to avoid going to prison. Ella Mae Wiggins, a white single mother of 9 children who worked in the textile mills, was the prominent leader of the North Carolina strike. She loudly championed racial equality and wrote songs about fighting the bosses. She was assassinated by company thugs on her way to a union meeting. By 1934, the mass uprising had expanded beyond the unemployed and the Southern workers to the industrial workers. In San Francisco, the Communist Party leader Samuel Darcy joined with Harry Bridges to lead a general strike. Dock workers rejected the conservative leaders of their union, went on strike across the city, and workers across the city struck in solidarity. The bosses were unable to use black workers as scabs because the black community supported the strike. Black communist leaders had a great deal of influence in San Francisco. The communist-controlled Longshore Union included hiring black workers in the strike's demands. The Longshore strike was successful, and dock workers won representation and a hiring hall. The International Longshore Warehouse Union on the West Coast remains one of the most radical labor unions to this day. The San Francisco General Strike in the summer of 1934 took place alongside the General Strike in Minneapolis, led by Trotskyists, and the Toledo Auto Light Strike, led by a small social democratic group called the American Workers' Party. In the summer of 1934, textile workers went on strike all across the South, led by the Communist Party's National Textile Union. After the mass strike wave of 1934, the Roosevelt administration began to take action to appease labor activists and unemployed workers. Roosevelt passed the Wagner Act, a federal law that legalized the right of workers to join unions, and said that if the majority of workers voted to have union representation, they were entitled to it. Right? The Wagner Act in 1935, in response to this huge strike wave, they legalized unions. Right? In 1935, Roosevelt also created the Works Progress Administration and hired millions of unemployed workers. The unemployed workers wore bright green uniforms, built post offices, paved roads, and did other useful work around the country. And actually, I have a picture in here where there's a communist rally, as you can see, and it says, "The rich can pay for the WPA." And they're saying, tax the rich to pay for hiring the unemployed. All right? In the 1930s, the Communist Party was a household name across the country. The Soviet Union was becoming an industrial power, and many people joined the Communist Party out of admiration for the Soviet Union. Electrical engineers, architects, agricultural scientists, painters, dance instructors, musicians, and athletic coaches, and other skilled people from the United States were frequently being hired by the Soviet government as the economy rapidly expanded with economic programs called the 5-year plans. If people liked what they saw in the Soviet Union, it seemed logical to then join the Communist Party once they returned to the United States, and the Soviet government officials generally suggested that they do so. Becoming a communist was not an easy life. It meant working a full-time job in industry with other communists who were organized into shop nuclei, or cell. It meant spending your evenings and mornings selling the Daily Worker newspaper to everyone in your neighborhood. The party maintained very strict policies of democratic centralism. Members were expected to repeat the party line at all times, no matter what they personally believed, reserving any disagreements only for internal discussions. The Communist Party's support among African Americans rapidly expanded during this period, and the party put forward the famous Black Belt thesis. The Communist Party's program stated that the regions of the U.S. South that were majority African American had the right to secede from the United States as a means of granting self-determination to the oppressed black nation. The demand for an independent Negro Soviet republic in the South was popular with many black nationalists. Similar demands were adopted by the Nation of Islam, the Republic of New Africa, and other African American organizations. Actually, then on the next page, I have a poster, right? This was a Communist Party election poster from 1932, and it says, independent self-determination for the Black Belt, and it shows the areas that would have the right to secede from the United States and form an independent black Soviet republic, right? Pretty wild. During the 1932 presidential campaign, the Communist Party put up posters with a map of the future United Soviet States of America. In some versions of the poster, the capital of the USSA is Chicago, an industrial city in the center of the country. Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi became an independent black republic where the land was redistributed to the descendants of slaves. The slogan of the Communist Party's 1932 presidential campaign was "A revolutionary way out of the crisis." William Z. Foster traveled across the country giving speeches about the need for a Soviet America where unemployment and hunger would be eliminated. In almost every town he visited for his presidential campaign, William Z. Foster was arrested. In Los Angeles, the police tortured him for hours before releasing him. Over 103,000 people voted for the Communist Party in the 1932 presidential election, even though communists were banned from the ballot in most southern states because they advocated racial equality. After the presidential campaign of 1932, Foster had a heart attack and a psychological breakdown as a result of extreme stress. He went to the Soviet Union to recover. Earl Browder, the party's general secretary, stepped up to lead the party. Earl Browder was an anti-war activist from Kansas who had gone to prison for refusing to fight in the First World War. For the 1932 convention of the Communist Party, the African-American poet Langston Hughes wrote a poem. He said, "Put one more S in the USA. Let's make it Soviet. Put one more S in the USA. Oh, we can win it yet. When the land belongs to the farmers and the factories to the working men, the USA, once we take control, will be the USSA then." And that is a chapter from my book, The Rise and Fall of the U.S. Communist Party. And, this book sells. It's popular, and it's based on a class that I gave. In 2015, I gave a class in New York City. It was a good 30 people attended it, in New York City, on the history of the Communist Party. And that chapter is it's basically what the Communist Party did during the Great Depression. And actually, in the print edition of the book here, I actually included a lot of their official documents. You can read what William Z. Foster wrote in his presidential campaign literature. You can read official essays and pamphlets and statements from the Communist Party. I had a lot of original material from the Communist Party during that time because it's important to see how they spoke to people. You can get it on Amazon. You can get this book. It's widely available. Book distributors have it. Rise and Fall of the U.S. Communist Party. But we need to be thinking about this because we're entering a new Great Depression right now. Now, obviously, it's not 32. It's not 1932, and we can't be doing the same thing the Communist Party did back in the day. There is no Soviet Union. There is no global communist movement as there once was, and that things are very different, right? But we should read about this. And the main thing that the Communist Party did during the 1930s was build community among those who were suffering and provide aid to the hungry, right? these unemployment councils, they fed people at the meetings. They fed them, right? And they would bring people together who were suffering, and they would teach them communism, and they would teach them to go fight, and go organize and resist and fight for their interests. Storm City Hall, it's so funny. I read you that part about the bonus march, and how important the bonus march was. There's all this anti-communist stuff, right? That veterans, how could you be a communist? There's veterans who've fought in wars against communism. Well, veterans wouldn't have veterans benefits if it wasn't for the Communist Party that went and occupied D.C. 43,000 people, veterans, were organized by the Communist Party to camp out on the National Mall demanding veterans benefits. 43,000 people occupied the National Mall, led by James W. Ford, a communist, and they organized to demand veterans benefits, the bonus march. Read about it. Veterans benefits. There would not be veterans benefits if it weren't for communists, right? Communists fought for the rights of veterans. Nobody talks about how much communists have done, to fight for the rights of military veterans, to fight for the rights of workers. The story of what the Communist Party actually did, the fact that nowadays when people think of communists, they think of, some college kid, who's got interesting ideas and runs around the streets breaking windows. That was not these people. You read about what the Communist Party did. You look at these mass, rallies of unemployed people. They're all wearing suits and ties. And they have signs that says, "We are citizens, not transients. Why can't you give my dad a job? Work or riot," right? That was another sign that they had. It was a big sign that they would carry out. Work or riot, fight or starve. The Communist Party was a group of people who said, you know what? We're suffering right now. We don't have jobs. We're losing our homes. And this isn't fair. This isn't right. It's bad for the country. And we are going to organize to build a new America. And they had songs. They would sing songs, folk music, beautiful songs they would sing. And they would care for people. And every neighborhood, every block, you go to, urban areas, the Communist Party would be there organizing people, right? It was similar to what the Black Panthers were able to do among the African Americans during the 1970s. They weren't a sect. They weren't degenerates. They weren't wild young people that were mad and alienated and expressing their alienation with politics. What they were people. They were upstanding citizens fighting for their rights, demanding that the bosses treat the workers better, talking about what socialism in the United States would look like, the USSA. The Communist Party was an organization that really got amazing things done, and that's why they broke it up during McCarthyism. That's why they went after it so viciously during the McCarthyism. When the economy was booming in the United States, they went after that Communist Party because they knew if the economy went down again, they didn't want something like the Communist Party to be able to mobilize that level of effective resistance. And there's already an economic crisis now. People are losing their jobs. People are inside, but people are hungry. There's tent cities all across California. This is a moment where we have a role to play. We need to start building community. I think that one of the biggest mistakes that was made after the last big financial crisis, 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, Occupy Wall Street, one of the biggest mistakes I think that we made, and I made this mistake, I was more guilty of it than anybody, was that we emphasized the struggle too much. We just said, oh, people need to be in the streets. People need to organize. People need to protest. People need to be in the streets, right? It's got to keep heating the streets. Where are the protests? We were emphasizing action, right? We need protests, but we weren't emphasizing infrastructure. We weren't building communities, right? And street chaos in and of itself doesn't really accomplish that much. It accomplishes something. But, the Arab Spring, whole lots of people in the streets. That was a lot of street chaos. But did it really improve the situation in the Middle East? Not at all, right? If you don't have a socialist organization, if you don't have a community centered around socialist ideas and socialist values, if you don't have networks of people who can care for each other and support each other, you're not really, street chaos in and of itself actually can make things worse. It can create a justification for a government clampdown. It basically, it's problematic. And Occupy Wall Street, right? We didn't, what was it about? There was no ideology there, number one. What was it about? I was there. It was all day, all week, Occupy Wall Street. Everyone there had a different idea. number one. And number two, it wasn't sustainable, right? It was broken apart as soon as they cleared the park. I mean, it took a little while, about a year long. People were still going to meetings, but after a while, it was kind of broken apart. We need to build a sustainable axis of people in the United States who believe in socialism and believe in anti-imperialism, right? We need to build an ideological community, a network of people who care for each other, number one, and support each other, number one, and number two, are training people and giving people ideological guidance. I tell people that it almost needs to be like a secular religion. What do people do, right? Their church is their community. They go to church on Sunday to see a group of people that they can depend on, that are like their family. Number one, it's their community. But number two, they go to hear, the speech, the sermon from the pastor. They go to sing, hymns, and they're getting their ideology, right? That socialism needs to become the new church, right? And that's basically what it needs to be. It needs to be once a week, twice a week, people that live normal lives, normal people all across the United States of America need to go once a week to have a community of people that they know, that they trust, that they can depend on, that are like their community, number one. And then with that group of people needs to come ideology, right? Needs to come ideology, real ideology, socialism, right? And that needs to be done. We need to build a community around socialism, a community where people can depend on each other. They don't have to be alone. They can get support from each other, not just economic support, maybe when people are down and out, right? How many times have you seen that in a church? So-and-so just lost their job. Can we take a collection for so-and-so? Not just financial support, but psychological support. Get people's spirits high. Once a week, they can go to the meeting and they can hear speeches, and they can hear communist songs, and they can get their spirits high. We need to build a community around socialism. That absolutely must be built right now more than ever. It absolutely must be built. We need a community around socialism. We need to build a socialist community. We need socialist infrastructure. Street chaos. Strikes, protests, I'm not opposed to that. I'm certainly not opposed to that. But that was the mistake. In 2008, I was saying that. Everyone was saying, oh, we just got to be in the streets. We got to be in the streets. And that was not the right answer. That was exactly, they were prepared for that. The Arab Spring, social media, Obama and the State Department knew exactly how to manipulate that, right? But there was no infrastructure. There was no community. There was no ideology. All the important things, the things that movements are based on, was missing. All of that was missing, and that's why, the fallout of the 2008 financial crisis ultimately was a disaster. It made things worse. The fact that there was not, there was not a world communist movement, that was a problem. But ultimately, there needs to be community. There needs to be an axis. We need to figure out how to build it, right? And we have to build it. You have to build it. I have to build it. We have to build a community because we're going to need support, right? How many of us watching this now might be without a job in a couple weeks, right? I'm just being real, folks. I hate to be Mr. Negative, but how many people here are going to be worried about not having their homes and schools, right? We're going to need to build a community of people that can support each other amid this financial meltdown that's happening. It's already happening, right? We need to build a community of people that will organize and demand a better life, right? And community service is needed now more than ever. Feeding people, right? Giving people something to live for. Feeding those people that are hungry. Taking care of those who've been left behind, right? We need to figure out how we who believe in socialism are going to swing into action during this crisis. Look what the Communist Party did during the 1930s. Read this. And I talk about it in City Builders and Vandals, too. I have a whole section about what the Communist Party did and the pending financial crisis in the United States. This is big, what's happening now with coronavirus, but it's setting the stage for a huge capitalist crisis. And that is going to require us to build something sustainable that can provide for people and build an axis within U.S. society that opposes capitalism and imperialism and wants to build socialism with American characteristics. Dust James is jokingly saying, wait, being an edgy person on the internet doesn't bring about revolution? You're absolutely right about that, that's the situation. A lot of us who believe in socialism just want to sit on the internet and be angry, and that's not going to cut it, folks. I mean, we need to build a community. That's why I was trying to build the Center for Political Innovation, so we could have a community around these ideas. Now, the founding conference is on hold. We're still going to do it. Once society comes back on, we're going to have our conference. But we got to figure out what we can do on a local level. I mean, you should envision. I want everyone watching this to envision what you could do in your neighborhood. In your neighborhood, could you start having a weekly socialist meeting in your neighborhood? Is it possible? Maybe it's not, right? Maybe it is. But think about it. Could you start convening a weekly socialist meeting in your neighborhood where people got together, listened to some speeches, read some ideology, sang a few socialist songs, where people got to be friends in a way they could take care of each other? Could you do it? Could you build a sustainable, long-term socialist community in your neighborhood? Could you build the equivalent of a Bolivarian circle, the equivalent of a Soviet, the equivalent of a CDR in Cuba? Could you build a community assembly, right, that just got together once a week and talked about things, read some ideology, sang some songs, and could you build a socialist center, a socialist meeting in your neighborhood? Could you do it? Think about it. Maybe you can't, right? Maybe it's not possible. I know when I was living in Ohio, and when I was like 15, I would be in touch with communist groups, and they'd say, go and lead a walkout at your school against George W. Bush. And I'd be like, everyone at my school likes George W. Bush. That's not going to work. But, could you actually, build something that could be part of the sustainable political infrastructure that we need in your neighborhood? Could you do it? Could you do it? Right? Could you do it? I think you could. I think a lot of you could. Maybe all of you can't, but some of you could. Right? Could you become an organizing center? Right? I know there's people watching this internationally. This isn't all just US folks, right? I see folks from Australia, folks from Europe, elsewhere, right? But think about what you could do in your neighborhood. How could you build a community around these ideas? How could we build something sustainable? So this isn't just entertainment. This isn't just, people tuning in to, hear Caleb talking, right? What could you build in your neighborhood? What kind of meaningful life, meaningful community could you build around the socialist ideas to weather the storm? Because the storm is coming, folks. The storm is upon us. The economy is not doing well. And we're going to come out of this coronavirus mess in a lot of pain. There's going to be a lot of pain, and there's going to be a lot of suffering. And when you're in pain and when you're suffering, that's when you need other people more than ever. You can't suffer in silence. You can't suffer alone. You need other people's support, right? That's when human beings depend on each other the most, is when they're facing a crisis. So what will you be able to do? What will you be able to do? That's what I want you to think about, folks. I hope I'll be back online soon. I know I've got plenty to talk about. You guys are very, very important to me. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. Be sure to hit that like button. Let's keep building this community, and let's keep organizing to build a better life, because there's so much that needs to be done, folks. And it's frustrating to be in a situation where you're on lockdown. But folks, let's do it. And folks, I want to be online as much as I possibly can. I'm going to be home a lot, as most of you are aware. So send me. If there's anything you want me to talk about, send it to me, right? Tweet it at me, right? Let me know. I'm open to suggestions, right? Because we're going to be getting to know each other a lot. We're going to be home a lot. We're going to be at home and all of that. So we got plenty. Now is the time to let me know what you want me to talk about. So, folks, what we need now more than ever, I almost don't even need to say it because people realize it. We need a government of action to fight for working families. Thank you, David Fox, for the super chat. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. And thanks once again, David Fox. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, the people of all countries must get prepared. Revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, the people of all countries must get prepared. Revolution is the main trend in the world today. Thanks, folks. I'm out.